welcome everybody to week 1 of our coach certification kickoff. It's so lovely to see some of your faces again. I know it hasn't been too long for some of us like a week or two, and others a little bit longer. But we're really excited to get this work started with you and deepen some of the thinking that we started in those in-person kickoff days. We'll probably spend a little bit of time just going over the technology of Zoom and getting reoriented to core tools to make sure you feel comfortable with the resources we'll be using as our learning platform over the next couple of weeks, 8 weeks. And so our first session will seem to move maybe a little bit slower as far as content goes, just because we are going to spend time making sure you guys are comfortable with that. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. We also have Monique here with us, but I think all of your faces are familiar, which lucky me, I think I did get to see most of you for those kickoff days. But my name is Heather Sampsell. I'm an implementation manager for the Literacy Design Collaborative, and I've been doing these virtual sessions for about the last year and a half, and I was introduced to LDC about 6 years ago as an educator. So this is really exciting to really deepen the work with people like you as you are coaches or teachers or instructional leads, giving you the opportunity and the tools to feel comfortable taking this work back to your teachers and your PLCs and really just deepening all of the thinking. So excited to be here. I'll let Monique introduce herself and then we'll get rolling a little bit.
Hi everybody, I'm Monique Horton and I'm a 27-year classroom teacher veteran and retired in 2014, and have been working with LDC as a consultant and training in it for about 4 years now. And I'm coming to you from the far corner of East Tennessee, and I'm excited to be here. And I see some of you guys, I recognize some of y'all from our days in the various areas in Kentucky, so that's exciting and looking forward to it.
So let's go ahead and, since you guys are from different counties, give you an opportunity to really do like a quick whip of just, hi, this is who I am, this is the county I'm from, and maybe one thing that you're excited about as we're getting started in this learning. And that'll get you guys oriented with one another, because we will ask that we have partner chats and some different kind of workshopping sessions where we provide each other feedback. So to really grow that community and make sure that is present, I want to provide you the opportunity to just quickly introduce yourself. So whether you want to pop something in the chat, just your name and where you're joining us from, or if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, just make sure you do one or the other, and we'll spend a few minutes doing that. Hi, Shelly. Great to see you again. Oh, we're experts at the chat. See, we're good.
It's always hard when the chat moves this fast to read everything.
Right, I know. Well, that's why I'm always glad that I have the chat afterwards. So when we send that out, you guys can always review, but it sure does test your skills. All right, Sabrina, Stacy, Kelly, Lana. All right, it looks like we have most of us. Some of us are still typing. It's always fun virtually to try and figure out if people are done typing because of like where their shoulder placements are. A little different than being in person. So you come up with these different strategies. Okay, so with that, I want to take you into what we call our syllabus that's housed in Core Tools. We did link it to the calendar invites, but I'm going to go ahead and share that link in a moment after showing you how to get there. So I'm going to share my screen, and when it does that, it's going to open up a big window on your screen so you can watch me do it first. In order for you to exit that, you'll hover your cursor up at the top of the window and just click exit screen so you can pull up Core Tools yourself in a window. But I'll show you first just how to get there so we can get some of our thinking started and wrap our heads around this project that we're working on together. So once you log into Core Tools, you will head to your Learn tab and scroll all the way down. Oops, sorry, just kidding. So head to the Learn tab. You'll see 2 different options here for viewing. And when we meet as a group, we'll ask that you have one tab open with the learner chosen, and then another tab open with the leader chosen. And really, you can hover back and forth, but it will be easiest for our work to make sure that you have them both up and available. When you get to Learn and you click on the Leader option, this is where you will find your syllabus. It's located under the quality tasks, which is this work that we'll be doing together. The first part of that coach certification is just focusing on the task. And when you open that, you'll see what each of these weeks will look like. Within these weeks, you'll see a breakdown of what we call our synchronous work, which is everything we'll do together as a group, and then some asynchronous work. So I'll show you what that looks like for week 1. It's set up similar to our courses. So we have the title here. You have your status information that you're used to seeing. This gives us a little bit of information just about what our virtual PLCs will look like. We're using Zoom. We'll ask that you try and understand some of the different norms that we have, like the muting if we're not in this whole conversation, using the chat, making sure we're in that quiet space, and then just some norms for your asynchronous work, kind of referencing those teacher competencies again that we talked about when we were together in those in-person days, and really reiterating that you'll be viewing this practice in a leader mindset and a learner mindset, thinking about those professional learning supports that you can provide others in the process. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see some weekly commitments, and this is just kind of agreements that we have that will attend the meetings. If you can't attend a meeting, that's fine. Send me an email. Like I said, we have those recordings that can come back out, and so we'll make sure that you're feeling caught up and that we'll answer any questions you might have. Also making sure that you're really doing that asynchronous work, because that will help prepare you for the following virtual session. At times, we will ask you to spend some of your asynchronous work working with a partner. So over the next week or 2 in our meetings, you'll notice we'll start gravitating towards having these partner chats and thinking partners as you're developing your quality task. And so that might be part of the asynchronous work as well. If you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see exactly what this is kind of organizing for us. We have our during week 1 content and focus resources. So this is everything we'll be doing together. And then this is everything you will do before our next virtual session. Keep in mind, we do move at the pace of the group. So there are times where we may not get to this last starter collection set or something like that, but we at least like to have it nice and organized for you so you can see what the expectations are in person as well as before your next session. Do you guys have questions about this so far? And feel free, if you have questions along the way, to type them in the chat. I know Monique is really paying close attention to that. It's a little bit more difficult when I'm sharing my screen to see the chat, but if you have questions, now would be a great time to unmute and ask or send a question in the chat. All right, so I'll give you a minute to navigate here. Again, you'll want to open up your internet browser, pull up Core Tools, head to that Learn tab, and then you'll click the Leader, LDC Leader, and then your Quality Tasks.
And if you're struggling with that, I posted the link in the chat. Hopefully that will get you there.
Thanks, Monique. It's a little bit hard, I know, at first to try and figure out kind of where people are at. So if you were able to pull that up, can you give me like a thumbs up or nod your head so I know you're good? I see some thumbs. Okay, I'm scrolling through. Smiles. Okay. It's always hard to tell. All right, so now that you have access to that, you can feel free to peruse through and figure out what we'll be working on these next few weeks. But really, this will be our home base. So the beginning of every session, we'll look at the week that we're focusing on. We'll think about the work that's going to be done, whether it's together or independently before our next session. And then we'll come back at the end just to talk about that work that you're going to want to be thinking about as you leave. So with that, we talked a little bit about Zoom. You do have that chat option. If you hover over yourself, you can mute or unmute, which you've already done as well. You guys are Zoom experts. At times, we will use what's called breakout sessions. And so we'll have us move into like different groups and different teams and work together there. And so we're hoping, I know our first session is usually a little bit quieter, but we're hoping with time you'll feel really comfortable unmuting yourself and sharing your thinking so we can all learn from you and build off of one another in the process. So keeping
and
that,
Heather, as they're
go
working along in chat, if anyone wants to send a message and doesn't want it to go to everyone, you can send a private chat to me if you're struggling with something, or to Heather by just selecting our name and going in there.
Yep. So if you click that blue everyone option, it will let you choose one person to send a message to. Thanks, Monique. All right, so let's go ahead and get ourselves moving. Remember how I asked originally to have 2 Learn tabs pulled up? We wanted that Leader tab as well as the Learner tab. We're going to head to the Learner option within our Learn and move into the instructional cycles. So when we were together in person, we spent a good amount of time going through Analyze Standards. We talked about finding standards and evidence of standards in student work. We did that really fun standards activity where you came up with some kinetic different movements to help you recall what the gist was of each of those standards. And then we talked about analyzing those standards within the tasks themselves. And so we're going to scroll past that and move into instructional cycle 1, standards-driven tasks. I will give you a minute to navigate there. But as you're doing that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the difference is between adapt and design. So even though both of these are instructional cycle 1 for standards-driven tasks, adapt a standards-driven task is more used for groups of people that are going to work on one common module. So for example, when I was down in Florida teaching middle school, we had another school that we partnered with, and we used ADAPT, which are really common modules to work on and build together as big, huge grade levels. And then we kind of made little edits that we needed to make it fit better with our class and our specific students. We are going to be spending most of our time in design. Since this is the coach certification journey, your goal will be to build that quality task by the end of these 8 weeks. And so under design, a standards-driven task, you'll see 8 different sessions. Most of you started talking about session 1 in your in-person facilitation days. So we talked about establishing a purpose for your work and deciding on maybe when to teach that first module. That should have helped you start thinking about the content that you'll be building your task around. If you're not that far yet, the goal for this next week for you will be to try and determine when you think this module should be taught based on maybe something that's lacking in the content that you know you want to focus on. Or maybe it's something that's in the 3rd quarter and you know that would be a good time to have a teacher teach this for you or to co-teach this. And so thinking about that instructional cycle, determining when you actually teach your module will be very important because that will also guide some other instructional decisions. Do you guys have questions about that so far?
Another quick question. When you're
Yes.
saying time to teach the module, but then a little while ago you were talking about the task. So are we setting a timeline to have our task finished or the entire module finished?
Ooh, such a good question. Often in this LDC world, I use the words module and task without really describing what I mean by those. And so your quality task is what we're focusing on over the next 8 weeks. We'll be building a task together using your content standard, your reading standard, and your writing standard. And when we say that this will then be taught, we're thinking that you could partner with a teacher and have them try the task in their classroom. A module is something that we'll have all the way by the end of your coach certification that has the instruction and the skills already put into the whole. So you have your task, your instruction, and your skills. And we're not expecting that you have an entire module built in these 8 weeks. It's very telling when you have a quality standards-driven task and you implement that in your classroom and have your students respond to see what instruction might be necessary, what students really got, and kind of to guide those decisions in the future. Does that make sense?
So the task that we build is not necessarily going to be part of the module that we do.
So it can be. Absolutely. You're thinking of semester 2 when we move into quality skills and instruction?
We were going to have our teachers do the task in semester 1.
Right.
And then our module is due in semester 2, correct?
Yeah, that could work.
They can be related, but don't have to be.
Right. It really depends on like the purpose for your work. So if you're thinking of, if you know that there's something missing in a curriculum sequence that needs to be addressed, then you would want to make sure you have a module or a task for that, right? And so it's just going back to the purpose and where you think this would be most necessary and most needed. Does that make sense? Are there any other questions?
Yeah, and Heather, and this is Kimba. Hi, everybody.
Hi,
I logged in
Kimba.
for just a second. I don't have my video on because it's too early for me here. But I just want to interject really quick. There is a difference between the pace of this particular course and how you might want your teachers to go through the work. And so just really seeing that difference. So for example, what Heather's describing now with this course is we're going to focus on the task these 8 weeks, and then you're going to build the instructional ladder to support that task, which is the full module next semester when we work on quality, skills, and instruction. Now, when it comes to your teachers, it's really important for them to see the student work right away. So you may have them build the ladder and focus on the skills around building the instructional ladder on their second module or their third module, right? Because if we go back to Richard Elmore's work, that task predicts performance, just by having a higher quality task and having them do the normal instruction with it, you should see improved outcomes. And that's kind of the idea. And then what happens if you start intentionally teaching the skills that you're planning for in the instructional ladder with a quality task? And so it's not trying to overwhelm teachers by having them do all the thinking and design decisions of a full module from the onset. It's building their skills as they go, tied to regular classroom instruction. So when it comes to you all deciding what you want to write your task for as a part of this coach certification course, you might want to think about something, if you want to see it in action this year, that maybe you'll teach, I don't know, maybe a teacher could use it in their classroom end of third quarter, fourth quarter, since we're not really building the instructional ladder till later. I mean, you could definitely design something right away and get it out there and see what happens with it in the classroom, but we'll be working with the same task and then building the instruction that supports it over the course of this entire year. Does that help clarify?
I think so.
I
I'm
see
seeing
that.
heads shaking. All right, and thumbs up. Thank you, Kimba. I didn't even know you were on here. Hello.
I was sneaky. I didn't turn on my video and I was muted, but it's so
Wow.
good to see all of you this morning.
I know, it's so different. It's nice doing it in the morning. I'm used to having evening sessions, and so everyone's like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning. All right, so if there's no other questions regarding those topics as far as how the building of the tasks and then thinking of the instruction will go, I'd love to move us back into some of the focus of our discussions in our in-person facilitations as we're thinking about standards. So that's what this is about, right? Developing that standards-driven instruction. So I'm gonna go all the way down to the bottom of this session to head to session 2. And this is all about selecting that focus cluster and those focus standards and using a template, an LDC template, to help you start making those design decisions around your task. So in session 2, we're just gonna think about a focus cluster, okay? And I'm gonna give you a few minutes to make sure you're navigating to the right area. I believe we already had those tabs open, but if you needed that extra time, this would be your time to do it. And as you're getting there, just keep in mind we're in that session 2, starting at think and practice. Can you just give me like a thumbs up or a head nod if you were able to get there? Some of us are not there yet. So we'll head to the Learn tab, to Instructional Cycle 1, and then we're in session 2. All right, I'm starting to see some of us. How about now? Thanks. So old school classroom. Okay, so once you get to session 2, I'm gonna have you guys take a few minutes to start reading and just reorienting your thinking about the focus cluster and how we can use standards to drive our design of a task. So we'll start reading at Think and Practice. and you'll read all the way down to this slideshow. Even take a few minutes to go through this slide deck just to reorient your thinking around standards and how we can use that focus cluster to raise rigor in the task. So I'm going to leave this open just to remind you where we're at, but we're in session 2, starting at Think and Practice, reading all the way down and going through this slide deck to think about raising rigor in a task. And I'm going to post a question in the chat I would like for you guys to think about as you're reading or afterwards that I'll have some of us share when we're done. So I'll give you like 5 minutes or so to read through that. I'll go ahead and put that question in the chat. If you guys have any other questions or need help navigating there, let me know. All right, I'm seeing some great things come through the chat. If you haven't wrapped up your reading, just think about something that might be resonating with you so far and put that in there for us to share. Oh yeah, now I'm seeing them all come through. Give you another minute or so to make sure everybody has time. But some themes I'm seeing so far, hopefully you have some time to read through what people are posting. But I love, I guess it was what Charlotte had written and pulled out was that the focus clusters are important for students. They help students understand the purpose of the larger task and then keep that in mind while they work on those mini tasks. And it just reminds me that ultimately, to get students to think the way we want them to think, which is deeply about standards, they should know what those standards are and how to do that. And so by building these standards-driven tasks, we're providing those opportunities for them to dive really deeply into that type of thinking where the students are doing all of the work and not necessarily the teachers having to do the pushing and presenting and trying to get them to see it. If they're doing the deep thinking themselves, that's what it should look like in the classroom. I saw that in one of the other posts too about the student work. Taking away that kill and drill by using a focus cluster authentically to raise rigor. Absolutely. All right, so with that, now that you've had an opportunity to respond yourself as well as read what some other people had written, are there any insights or did you have any new insights as you were going through this work as far as how these focus standards clusters can change your thinking when you're designing tasks? So whether it's just an extension of what you had written or kind of sharing why, I invite you to go ahead and unmute yourself for a minute and just share a little bit more about maybe something that's standing out to you that's new in your thinking or purposeful as we're moving through this process together.
I'll start.
Great.
One thing that I noticed that I really, it's starting to gel. It's been percolating, but it's starting to gel now. Is the idea that you don't have to get hung up on the whole standard. You can pull the pieces that you really want to target and you want to focus and really do a good solid spiral in that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And how powerful is that in your curriculum, knowing that your students are going deeply into that part of the standard with those two other standards to really make it meaningful work and being sure that you're teaching it well.
Absolutely.
Right? Thank you for sharing, Rachel. Anybody else?
I think for me, I love the part about, it's not about doing this all the time, but it's about the quality of the work and helping teachers to see that going deeply and raising that rigor and connecting the standards is what works well for students. So I think to me, that's the part that keeps going over in my mind, that it is more about how can we connect what we do instead of everything being disconnected and disjointed in our classrooms.
Oh, I love that. And I think the reality is teachers and we want that to happen for our students. We want to provide those experiences, but it may not have been in kind of the structured and organized way that this focus cluster can help us think about in a new, meaningful way. But modules cannot be taught all the time. There's just no way that would work. When I was in the classroom, we started with one module a year until we got comfortable with it. And then it hit a point over time where we found some gaps in our curriculum that caused us to want to build this type of standards-driven instruction for our science or our social studies, kind of, further developing that content understanding. And so we moved into having more tasks that were available and more modules that were available for people, but you can't do this all the time. And teachers that are starting this work with you guys in PLCs do need to know that this is a very slow moving process. I mean, if you think about even our work together in quality tasks, we're spending a significant amount of time talking deeply about standards and building a standards driven task. And so we can't expect teachers then to go and kind of like get this and create a module and go teach it in the way that we'd want them to with that deep understanding. And so that's why we invite you, when you're starting to work with PLCs, to start with those analyze standards pieces, thinking about just getting teachers to look at student work for evidence of standards, maybe bringing some of their own work or looking at other people's work, depending on their comfort level, and just to have those conversations. Because it's very important when you're moving through that process to provide them that thinking time and understanding to kind of rationalize the work, right? Anybody else? We'll take maybe one more and then move on. Thank you for sharing. All right. Monique, anything?
No, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and I think we're focused on our purpose here, so let's move on.
All right. So with that, we want to develop those focus clusters because we want students to write in response to reading. We want to make sure that they are deeply touching those standards, to Rachel's point, and that we have evidence as educators that they are going deeply into those standards. And so we're going to provide an opportunity to kind of start thinking about taking our understanding of a focus cluster and really in the back of your mind thinking, okay, well, goodness, if I'm thinking of a focus cluster, which content standard, reading standard, and writing standard might I use to develop my task? Before we move into having you work on yours over the next week, we're going to go through a little bit of one together. And the reality is we don't have enough time to go all the way through this activity, so we'll probably get started on it and then pick up where we left off next week. But I want to reorient you to that standards mental marker document that we used when we went through the different standards and came up with the movements, because we're going to look at a specific text from the purpose of, or from the perspective of like a 7th grade ELA teacher, okay? This text is something that could be used in social studies, but we're purely going to use it today from an ELA perspective. So keep that in mind as we're looking at our standards. So I'll have Monique pop the standards mental marker document in the chat so you can pull it up. It looks like this, just for your reference. And take a minute to reorient yourself to those reading standards. Keeping in mind, we always like to think and remember that standards mental marker 1 and 10 are kind of those bookends. The first one is that inference and evidence, which we always want students to do every time they're looking at text. And 10 is that reading and comprehending grade level text. So we'll just be thinking about which of the standards really, with the thinking work of 2 through 9, might help support a mode of thinking for students as they're looking at this specific text. So you should have that document in the chat. The next link we will share is this Alabama Archives document. I'm going to pop that in for you right now. Oh, it didn't work. And this one is a document from MLK that came out at a time when the integrated bus document came out to let them know kind of like, it had a very specific purpose. I'm trying not to give it away. Had a very specific purpose and was written for a very specific reason from people. So I want you to take a look at this document that I just put in the chat and think deeply about what you would want students or what students could be thinking about from an ELA perspective as they're reading this. What kind of conversations would you want students to be having around the reading standards? What level of thinking would you want them to have as they're going through this text? So just take a few minutes to read that text, use your standards mental marker document, and we'll pick up from there in just a few minutes. So I know you're still thinking, and one thing I realized I didn't point out is when we're thinking about developing a focus cluster for ELA, since ELA has content in itself, we choose 2 reading standards that can work together to support the type of thinking students will be doing. So in place of like a science or a social studies content, we think of an ELA content. In this case, I'm seeing an example of point of view, so R6. What other reading standard could you use alongside that writing standard to really deepen the thinking of your students? So when you're looking at that reading standard document, try and pick two that you think would lend itself well to the type of thought processes we want students to engage with for this document. I'm starting to see a few things come through the chat. Would anybody like to share their thinking behind? I'm seeing a lot of the same ones actually, which is nice. So R2 and R6 seems to be popular for this one. Who wants to share their thinking around that? Tell me why.
I'll share with the reading 6, the point of view and purpose. I'm a social studies teacher by nature, and getting kids to understand the perspective from which this was written. This is not in their time. They did not live this. So really having them process that there were actually rules and regulations as they get on these integrated buses, and having them to really process that is where I'm reading 6.
Okay. So understanding the point of view of the author of the text, really, right?
Yes.
Love it.
And what was going on historically at that time.
Okay. So the connection to R2 would be that main idea piece to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I see. What about R8? Someone had posted R8 and then there's an R9. Let's talk about those.
I posted the R9 as well. Again, giving more text around this time period, more of Martin Luther King's words, other civil rights activists, to have them. This is an isolated document, so let's compare what else is going on. And I don't know, but there may have been a document opposite of these rules and regulations, and they could do a compare and contrast.
That's possible.
There.
So I know another one that was pointed out in the chat was R5. Could you think about the specific structure of this text and why it was structured in that way? Having them call those details out and describe why the authors chose to specifically structure it in that way. R8 was mentioned, evaluating those arguments, analyzing 2 or more texts. What I noticed when I've had these conversations with others is also sometimes R4, the words and phrases that are used. And so that's something that could also be used. But as you're thinking of your focus cluster, again, you might have a great text in mind. And in this case, we started with the text. You would want to then move into what type of thinking do I want my students to really deeply be doing with this text? And with that, how are you going to write a task from the standards? So it's not just choosing then the thinking, it's trying to use those standards to help you draft a task. So when we meet next week, that's what we'll start out by thinking about. We'll revisit this document and some of your thinking as far as the standards and that focus cluster, and then we'll work together to model how to write a task based on choosing a template, an LDC template that's in our library, and uploading some of those standards to a task together. So you guys feel comfortable moving on and doing that on your own. Does that sound okay with everybody? All right. So I know it's 9:52. I do want to give us enough time to go back to our syllabus, which is where we start and stop each week. Provide you guys time for any questions you might have, and then end with our final word whip, which is where we go around and everyone can share something that's resonating with them. So start thinking about that now. Any new learnings or something you're excited about that's resonating with you, we'll ask you to share that right before you leave. I do want to model how to get back to your syllabus so you're comfortable doing that. Just to remind you, it's in the Learn tab under our LDC Leader in Quality Tasks in that first week. And if I scroll down, we got to know Zoom pretty well. Some of us were feeling more comfortable than others to unmute and speak up. I hope we get more comfortable as we move forward in that. But each of you were participating really well in the chat. I'm hoping you feel great about that. Not sure if you tried private chatting, but we can move into that in the future. We also talked about focus standards and didn't quite move into the template in session 2, but that's okay. We did have some really great discussions and started talking about how we could use those standards to drive the thinking work behind developing that standards-driven task. So what we'll ask you to do before our next session is to try and think about 5 teachers that you might try analyze standards with over the course of, your PLC schedules, if you're in the classroom or what your specific situation is. But start thinking about some people that you might do some of the analyze standards work with over the course of the next 8 weeks. And then we will send out a document for you guys so you have access to kind of logging in the thinking work that you're doing. We'll also ask that you guys just spend some time exploring these different design collections. So we have a starter task collection that shows you some templates that are nice and built out that already have some standards in mind that might help you. We also have the Kentucky collection with modules that are prepared and ready for you, as well as a Rankin, Mississippi collection, which is really fantastic. And if you're more on the elementary lens, this is Stevenson, the school I worked at for a very long time. The Stevenson collection has modules from K to 6. And so your work to complete will be to start thinking about your focus standards cluster. And if you find a template that matches with you, that's fine, but we hadn't gotten there yet, so don't feel too rushed to get to that section. Does that sound okay with you guys? Seeing some heads nodding. Okay, if you have questions in the process, feel free to email me, heather@ldc.org. I will stop sharing my screen with that and pull it up on grid view so I can see all of your lovely faces again. And I'll invite you to either post in the chat or to unmute yourself and just share something that's resonating with you, something you're excited about, and kind of where you're at. But otherwise, we will see you next week. You can log on after you share your final word with, and we'll see you later. Thanks, Paige. Depth of thinking.
And you can also email me at monique@ldc.org.
Yes.
I love the comment about looking at standards and developing a different mindset. And also there was something about teacher growth, which just zoomed past me. But I really, for myself, doing this deep dive into the standards-driven work helped me grow so much as a teacher and also as a coach.
Definitely. It changed the way I was teaching. It was just one of those light bulb moments. And it started really kind of infecting the way I was thinking about every lesson I was doing. It doesn't mean they were all, supporting the LDC structure, but just in the sense of like, what am I really asking my students to do and think about? How can I make that clear to them so I provide those learning opportunities? Huge shift in focus. Focus on rigor. I love the student thinking required. Sounds so easy, but you have to be really intentional about doing that, huh? Developing lessons where the students are doing the work, not the teachers. Direction, oh yes.
Tightening up of the structure of the lesson. That was a big one for me.
Mm-hmm. So again, for those of you that are still here, the follow-up email will come in the next coming days, probably by Tuesday. It will have the chat as well as the video linked to it. And if you guys have questions along the way, accessing your syllabus online or getting into core tools or any other questions, just let us know. But thank you so much for your thinking work and your time. We appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful comments and discussion.